So my name is Jennifer Clapper. I'm one of the mental health nurses from the ALS Association. And I think Jim may have said it already, but I just want to say again, we really applaud those of you who came today. We know this is probably not your choice of what to do on a beautiful day, when it's gorgeous outside, to really be coming here and taking the bull by the horns and getting as much information as you can. We know it takes a lot of courage to do. Wow, I think I just popped in there. So what I will be talking about is trying to figure out the questions to be asking yourself, how to be thinking about this choice. You'll be getting a lot of facts and information about several of the variables that are part of this decision. What I'll be talking about is, okay, now what? How do we as a family figure out how to make this choice? I think more than some other aspects of ALS, this particularly requires, in some ways, a family decision and family discussion, which may be kind of new and different for some folks. So, normal responses to talking about this, I think you will all appreciate the familiarity of some of these emotions. Confusion, fear, grieving, about why am I having to make this choice? Why should I have to be thinking about this? And maybe thinking, you know what, I really don't want to decide. Now I'm preaching to the choir here. This is a crew that is saying, there's a part of me that wants to put it on a shelf, but there is more of me that says, I need to really understand what this is about. Anger. Why should I have to be thinking about this? This isn't fair. And we agree, it's not. But on the other hand, really being able to look at all of the choices and all of the implications of the choices is really the best way for you to be the ones in charge. If I can make this keep going. Staying in charge is the way that you get to be the master of ceremonies and the ones who really make this happen. And in the middle there is a difference of opinion within a family. It's not unusual for family members to have a different opinion than the person with the illness and to have different feelings about the different choices that are involved. And I'll be talking a little bit about how you sort that out. Some people say, I just want to get the decision out of the way early, just so I can think about it, put it back on a shelf and not worry about it. We often find that people do that, and sometimes they are able to come to some pretty hard and fast decisions, and other people find that they revisit their choices again later. So, staying in charge, gathering information keeps you in charge. No decision is actually a decision. It's a default decision. And if people aren't really deciding when their healthcare team is saying, we really need you to be deciding, end up with emergency, can't talk today, emergency, forget it, you know what I mean, choices being made for you. That takes you out of the control seat, and that's about our last wish for you. There are no right or wrong choices for this. Some people say to me, if I choose one way, does that mean that I'm being a chicken? If I choose the other way, does that mean that I'm not courageous enough? Well, different people will spin that differently depending on what direction they choose. There really isn't a right or wrong. It is what is right or wrong for you and your family and your situation, and really staying true to your own feelings. In doing this, I think one of the best ways is, again, I'm preaching to the choir, is really making use of the supports around you. One of them is your family, your friends, your loved ones, maybe your spiritual guides or chaplains, and certainly your ALS team for information, resources, someone to help kind of bounce ideas off of. So I'm starting with the challenges because in my mindset, I tend to weigh pros and cons, and I like to kind of get the hard stuff out of the way first. So some of the challenges of life on a ventilator. Your orbit, what I say, kind of telescopes. It does mean that your world gets a little bit more narrowed or focused, with some important exceptions, but a lot of your life is spent in a little bit smaller range. As Dr. Gregory was mentioned, there is a loss of ability to eat by mouth and using a PEG tube most of the time. Now, some of you, we all know that the bumblebee isn't supposed to fly. Their wings aren't big enough to support their body weight, and some of them still manage to eat. Well, bumblebees fly, and some people can eat, even with a ventilator, but by far the majority cannot. Most lose the ability to speak verbally, and using assistive and augmentive technology, which Elisa will be talking about, is a really important part of your life, and thinking about, do I want to use the ventilator? How do I stay connected to the world? Another important challenge is that the disease does continue to progress in other muscles. So at the point that someone may decide to go on a ventilator, you may have hand use, or you may have different body parts that are working okay, or maybe with some weakness. But that does continue to change over time. At some point in that range, as we know with all other aspects of ALS, it's different for every person, but people on a ventilator do lose the ability to move altogether. And that includes facial muscles like blinking or using other body parts, which is a big challenge. Another one is what happens when you have a ventilator at your throat. It really does in some ways change physical contact, connection to other people. It's certainly, there are many ways to get around it, but it's a challenge. For some people, the best way to get the care they need while on a ventilator is to move to a nursing facility that is skilled at taking care of people on a ventilator. And that can be a big change for people. For some, staying at home is really not the best option. Susan Schwartz and Melissa Call will be talking a little bit more about that and about the issues that contribute to that decision. So let's go to the positives. You get to stay with your loved ones. You can read, watch TV, use the computer. Maybe you continue to work. Many of us now are doing so much with technology and remotely that some people can. People go on day trips. You need a lot more support. You need someone who's managing the ventilator and someone who's doing the driving and just coordinating the equipment that you need to bring with you. But one of our patients not too long ago went to the Bruce Springsteen concert that was, I forget where it was, anyway, he was in the front row because it was the handicapped seating, and he came back and he was just all aglow, and he said, and he typed in, he was so close he was spitting on me.
That's a good thing, right?
Yeah, for him it was, yes. Some of our folks continue to do the household finances online. They're the ones who do all the Christmas shopping online. They publish articles in major newspapers, have email conversations with people around the world. So in those ways, your orbit may actually expand as you find that some of the things that you're used to doing aren't an option, and you begin to kind of push out the envelope and find some new ways. I think, though, in talking to many of the families and people on a ventilator that I have learned from over the years, many of them say that there are lots of kind of exciting sort of little day trips or things that you do, but really what they have said is life distills to the heart, the spirit, really the core of your life is just what are these kind of abstract but really necessary things. When I think about what gets me up in the morning, it's not, well, it's recycling day, I need to get the recycling out. It's what that means. It's the people I'm going to see, the things I'm going to be doing, the connections that I will be making. And that's really what people on a ventilator tell me, is that I really need to be clear about what those really distilled things are, and can I continue to do that on a ventilator? So real life, there's a need for a very high level of support to do basic things. Getting out the door is more of a production. As some of our speakers later this afternoon will talk about, I think some of them have got it down to a streamlined kind of system. There are ways to do it, it just requires more planning and thinking. Family life really profoundly changes with the intensity of the caregiving that is needed for someone on a ventilator, and how the family chooses to coordinate and to deal with that can be very different. Some families handle it in a way that works, and other families really do struggle. The world, kind of like I was saying, it distills a little bit. The world is focused a little bit more internally than externally. So rather than going out and shooting baskets, you might be thinking more about who I'm connecting to online. Mood disturbances is a fancy way of talking about depression and anxiety. And I would say those are pretty much the norm for most people when they go on a ventilator. They are treatable. I think for many people there's a real kind of power struggle that happens when someone gets ventilated in dealing with the fact that you're connected to a machine that's doing your breathing for you. And I think on a really basic level that's hard for a person to be comfortable with. And there's often some anxiety that lasts for a couple of months, and we deal with it. So navigating the transition, I think intellectually, one of the important things is thinking, well, now ALS in many ways becomes a chronic disease. So it means kind of rethinking and reshaping. What are my goals? What do I want to think about? How do I want to structure my life? Really beginning to think, what do I want to do? What do I want to be accomplishing once the dust is settled and I'm used to the ventilator? Rather than waiting for the cure as a reason for getting a ventilator, to be thinking from day to day, what are the things that will give my life meaning and importance over time? Redoing advance directives. It sounds like, why would I have to do that? Well, oftentimes several months or a little bit later after that with families, I will sit down and say, okay, we need to think again about these really difficult questions, because at some point a person will lose the ability to communicate with the outside world, even with you know, ever better technology, which Elisa will talk about. There is a point when a person can't communicate, and we want to know and have families thinking about, what then? What do I want for myself? That's a really tough question, and it's really hard to answer, and it often takes many conversations to think about. Some people say, well, once I'm on, isn't that it? Well, no. It took a while, but now it is absolutely understood that a person has the ability to either withhold or withdraw any form of medical intervention that they get, which includes a ventilator. So someone may say, I want to keep going until this point, or at some point someone says, okay, I've really run my course with this, and I am going to go back to letting nature take its course. This is a very difficult concept for all of us, I think, in some ways, but really saying, I used some medical intervention and it was really good for a while, or maybe it wasn't so good, I tried it and it really isn't for me. And at that point of saying, I'm going to dial back the support from this artificial life support and go back to what nature was doing. Now, for most people, if they are weaning off of, if they are dialing back the support of the ventilator, it means that they pass away fairly quickly. So it's a difficult choice. So some people say, all right, so I hear about that choice. Now I want to hear about a little bit more about the other choice. And then I'm going to get to how as a family and how as an individual you think about these choices. So if I don't want a ventilator, then what? What does this mean for me? For most of our people, we really suggest including hospice in their care. Hospice is kind of a philosophy of care rather than an actual place or thing that you do, which is about more intensive home nursing and auxiliary staff care to support a person who is approaching the end of life. Most people stay at home. Some people go to a facility, but that's much more unusual. Hospice staff are really skilled at providing care for patients and support to families as they approach the end of life, and they work very carefully with ALS staff at clinics to make sure that the care is still well coordinated. Some people think of hospice as, you know, it may in some way hasten someone's death, and the answer is no. It is all about support and quality of life, dignity, personal choice. Hospice is not an option for people who are choosing mechanical ventilation because mechanical ventilation is an aggressive form of life support, and hospice is about allowing a natural death with support. Hospice also provides bereavement support to families and are most often covered by Medicare and private insurance plans and Medicaid. That's something to discuss with your social workers to make sure you understand what kind of coverage you do have for hospice, if that's a choice you're considering. If you do, you and your physician would be talking about when the appropriate time would be. I can tell you that at Pennsylvania Hospital, we tend to be fairly conservative in referral to hospice, meaning we like to do it sooner rather than later. We really have found that there's a big benefit in getting to know hospice staff and them getting to know you and how you operate, so that if things get rough, they can kind of hit the ground running. They are there 24/7 on call. They're not in your house, but it can be really helpful just knowing that they're on the other end of a phone. Once you and your physician decide it's time to consider hospice, the physician typically would make a referral to a hospice, and a hospice staff member would then come to your house at a prearranged time, and you would talk about the pros and cons of this hospice and decide if this is right for you. Sometimes, and it depends on the ALS clinic that you go to, your ALS physician continues to be your prescribing physician. That's the case at Pennsylvania Hospital. It's not the case at some other ALS clinics. It's just a difference of system. But the ALS clinic continues to be very much involved in your care. And of course, ALS Association staff are absolutely still involved. I still make home visits. We still help with support services. Everything is still available to you. So hospice typically will provide a home health aide maybe an hour or two a day. It's not, they're not there 24/7. They are there to support a family taking care of the person with ALS. A nurse will come about once a week to check out how things are going, listen to your lungs, learn about what symptoms are being managed and not managed, and really fine-tune and tweak. It's kind of nice having someone in the home because they can actually see you, and then they can be your doctor's eyes and ears also in helping to convey information and what's working and how to make things work better. For most, it means you don't have to go to the emergency room or a hospital. We had a patient who had, and some of you have even heard the story, we had a patient who had food poisoning, which they conveniently got at about 5:15 on a Friday, which means, Mary Kelly and the nurses at the various ALS centers have gone home, and it's an on-call person. They were on hospice, but what they chose to do was kind of tough it out for the next 36 hours. So by Sunday morning, the wife of the patient, who was a complete assistance transfer out of a chair with food poisoning, was completely washed out and exhausted, and finally she called hospice and explained to them, and hospice had medication shipped to the home an hour later, and that afternoon his wife is finally sleeping and he's watching the game, which at that point we were still optimistic about. So they can be a real help in many ways. Let's see. Hospice also can provide other supports, additional social workers, chaplains, respite care for caregivers, and other supports for the family. So how do you think about all these things? I think I've got about 15 minutes. You can do it. So one of the biggest things is thinking, well, do I have past experience with either of these choices? What I hear often from patients and families is, I had a relative on a ventilator and they were completely not interactive. They just laid in a bed, and I don't ever want that for me or for my loved one. I think this is one of the most important distinctions with ALS, is that people, when they first get ventilated, are not just non-interactive. For the most part, they are still very much interacting. They're still, like I was talking about, they're doing the Christmas shopping online. There is a point at some time in the future when interaction isn't possible. But it's a very different kind of decision from someone who, for instance, was in a car accident and isn't conscious. So kind of keeping in mind, okay, that was that story, this is someone else and their experience that I remember, but this is very different. Some people may also have experience with someone on hospice, maybe it was positive or negative. If you find that you're struggling with past experiences and trying to sort out, well, how much of this can I carry forward to this decision about a ventilator, I'd encourage you, or hospice, and I would encourage you to talk about it with your healthcare team to sort out what's real, what should I be thinking about, what maybe was a one-time experience. Family context and values. This is so important. I can tell you that I'm a mutt and I come from two different families who have completely different approaches to healthcare, to illness, to decisions about medical choices. One side of my family said basically, when a point is that you can't be independent at home with a little bit of help, that really is the time that you go to a nursing home really close to us, and we're going to be there every day bringing food and doing all this, but you're going to be at a nursing home. The other side of my family says nursing home never, ever, ever. And the responsibility always falls on the female who happens to be the nursiest. And at some point it begins to spread out. But those things all become part of what I carry forward in thinking about what is an okay decision. And I think in this situation, past experiences are really important, and understanding your family's approach to these things is really helpful. But I'm going to tell you, none of them, for the most part, have had to deal with this kind of a choice, with this kind of a situation, and someone's choices about ALS and ventilator versus hospice. And I would really like you to be able to kind of tease out, okay, as much as I respect what my family's kind of way of doing is, they don't understand this situation, and I might need to break out a little bit in another direction. But until you really recognize and can kind of articulate what my family thought, it's going to be a little bit harder not to just sort of go with the flow in a way that might not actually be most true to the situation. Other things that I want you to be thinking about when you think about this choice are unfinished business and what are my goals? Do I feel like there's things that I need to do that I won't be able to finish now, that I really do need to do? Finances. Your finances now and the implications for the future are a real part of this choice, and thinking about the well-being for you and for your family. Your fears. One person said to me, I'm really afraid to go on hospice, and I think I'm being very chicken, and it just means that I'm afraid to die. And another person said to me, I'm just too afraid of the ventilator. I know that that's not what I should be, but I really am, and so I'm going to go with hospice. As much as possible, being able to articulate those and talk about it with your support team and your family to try to allay some of those fears in whatever way you can is important. Spiritual beliefs. Some people feel that intervention is not okay. Other people feel that you need to take everything that's out there. If you find that you're struggling with the choices within your spiritual beliefs and not sure that it's really matching up with how part of you is feeling, to be able to have a conversation with your spiritual guides, whoever they are, to decide, am I interpreting this correctly, or are there other ways I can look at this? Because this is kind of how I'm feeling. So you probably all got a handout from me, which you can take home, but it is your homework assignment. Not to be done all at once necessarily, but what I would like you to do is to try very hard to go through some of these questions and ask both yourself as a person with this illness and as a family member of saying, how do I feel about these questions? It doesn't mean writing an essay on every subject. It could be a one-word answer for these questions. But I want you to be able to bring these kind of lurking thoughts in the back of your mind a little bit closer to the front burner. So what fears do I associate with each choice? What does each choice mean to my self-esteem? On the two people that I talked about, both of them felt like somehow they were failing. They were making the wrong choices. They weren't doing the most courageous thing, whatever they perceived as the most courageous thing, which kind of broke my heart because they're all courageous, all of them. And helping you to see that the most courageous thing is doing what you feel is right for you is what certainly I hope for, and I'm sure your loved ones hope for you too. How do you think about length of life as a goal versus quality of life as a goal. For some people, it might be one or the other. And really taking a hard look at what is my quality of life like right now, and how I'm handling what I'm living with all of these ALS challenges. And how do I see that as being okay in the long run? Oh, and just to go back to that, another little thing I'd like to add is just, I'm sure if many of you kind of recall maybe a time when you didn't have ALS and you might have been thinking, if you see someone in a wheelchair, there's no way I'd be able to handle that. Or if I had speech trouble, there's no way I could handle it. And yet, people find over time that they can come to be okay with things that they never would have thought they'd be okay with. It's still going to be a fine-tuned decision, because at some point you may be saying, no matter what, I'm not okay with this or I'm not okay with that. But give yourself some room to be thinking, I didn't think I'd be able to be okay with a cane, and it's really not so bad. So what makes life most worth living? Like I said, taking out the recycling is good, but it's the people that I'm, doing that with that, for me, make it most important. But saying to yourself, what circumstances would make life not worth living? Are there spiritual issues that you're concerned about? And how does your spirituality affect your decision? And I'm using spirituality in the most global sense of how we value life or think about what gives life meaning. Family, this is the other big thing. And again, this is one that families, when there's an illness, may find that the way you communicate has changed a lot, or changed a little in very subtle ways. It may be that there are people in the loop now that never were before, distant cousins or sister that lived in California. Or it may be that you kind of have some people out of the loop that you really kind of don't want to include because they're a loose cannon, or because you're trying to protect someone. And really being aware of how that line is drawn around your family and how people are communicating with each other. Because with this kind of decision, you need to be sure that you've got some input going in a real flow. Can the family learn about and discuss the options pretty honestly with each other, and saying, well, here are the implications of this choice for me, and knowing that, maybe for a family member to say, here are the choices and here are the implications for me, is not selfish to say, because that's all part of the decision. And the same goes for the person with the illness. What are family values around illness and caregiving? One side of my family complains all the time, and the other side, wow, are we stiff upper lip? So that may be part of your choices or discussion too. How much is it okay to share how I feel? Is there stress or conflict in the family now, even before thinking about a ventilator, with trying to manage care? Or is that going okay? How is the family handling this illness? How are relatives doing in terms of coping? Children doing with coping? Do family members have a genuine desire to care for someone on a ventilator? I have a wife of a patient who said, I love my husband to pieces, but the goop and the bodily effusions, I just can't deal with. I just am not that kind of caregiver. I can care in every other way, but not for that physical level. And it was a very difficult thing for them to decide, but they decided that just wasn't right for her. And he actually moved to a nursing home and was, fairly productive there for quite some time, and she visited often, every day. What impact as a patient do you see this decision having on your family? And really trying to take a cold, hard look at that. What do I see in terms of how my family is coping and how this would mean for them? And then you check it out with them. This is what I'm kind of thinking. And it's family's responsibility to be able to then come back and say, well, as much as I don't want to say it, you're right about that. But you know what, this part, really not so much. You're worrying about something you don't have to worry about. For the patient to be able to say, can I willingly accept help from people besides my family? Because when you're on a ventilator, you pretty much are guaranteed that you will need some help from people that you never met before with some pretty intimate things. Now, every once in a while there's an exception, but for the most part, people need some outside help. And maybe some of you have crossed that bridge already. But you know, many of us are very private, and it's a completely different world to have outsiders coming in and helping with personal things. Would I be willing to relocate, like to a nursing home, in order to be on a ventilator and receive the care I need? And would I be willing to use assistive technology in order to communicate? For many of us, that means embracing some technology that you might not be familiar or comfortable with, and that's a whole new arena to be exploring. There we go. For caregivers, I think there's a whole range of feelings that can be kind of hard to say out loud. Some of the tough ones are, could I actually do this? Oh my God, this looks really scary. Some amount of resentment about having to provide this care. And I bring that up because the person with the illness is having the other side of that resentment coin at times too, and saying, well, I resent having this, and I resent having to do it. Well, both of you do, and with good reason. Neither one of you asked for this to be visited upon you. And it's okay to resent it sometimes. Doesn't mean that you resent the person. We all resent the ALS. Ambivalence about your loved one's choices. How do I feel about it? Grieving, including anticipatory grief. Just thinking the things that I'm losing now, the things that I'm losing in the future. Those are all part of it for everyone, not just the person with the illness. Concerns about intimacy. How will I be close with my loved one if they have a ventilator? And guilt about all of these feelings, because caregivers are supposed to have a halo over their head and just be, you know, out there and embracing everything. Well, the fact is we're human, and some things we struggle with, and that's pretty normal. Anxiety about being placed in a decision-making role is a big one for caregivers, and one of the reasons why we really appreciate family patients who are making decisions themselves and not relying on family members to make it for them. For caregivers, there's often some hesitance about using respite time, and I think some of our panelists will talk about that later, of just saying that there are times when I need a break, and that's okay. Another important thing is saying, as a caregiver, how much of my kind of sense of personal integrity is wrapped up in how I am as a caregiver. For the wife who said, I can't do suctioning and bodily effusions, she felt like a failure. Somehow that meant she wasn't a good enough person and a good enough caregiver. And really talking with her about what all of it meant and where her value came from, and did it all have to be tied up in caregiving? So, in some conclusion, hope is a really important other side of concerns and fear. I think hope has many different forms. Some of them have to do with long life, but many of them have to do with a rich life. Many of them have to do with what we're invested in while we're here, about comfort and grace and care, and really being able to say, what do I hope for besides what all of us hope for, which is a cure? What else do I hope for in my life? What else in my family provides hope? And how can I be involved in living regardless of my decision about a ventilator or not a ventilator? And all of these are on your handout, and I really do hope that you write little notes about this at home sometime when you have a chance, of, you know, as hard as it is and as much as I want ALS to disappear, of saying, what has ALS changed in my sense of meaning in life? Has it changed how I look at the world? And what are the victories that I, as a person living with ALS or a loved one of someone who is, what have I been victorious in? And truly, I find that people who come here should be celebrating a victory, because this is not easy. And all of you have made incredible kind of moves and explorations in a direction I'm pretty sure no one ever thought you'd be going in 10 years ago or at some point before this. And yet you've really moved into this and said, okay, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to figure this out. So thinking about those victories and saying, well, are they a part of this respiratory support choice? And what would they mean? I think, yep, that goes to the blank slides. Oh, I guess I can't go back. So that pretty much concludes things. What I'd like to say is if you do find that you're jotting down little notes eventually on that handout, bring it into clinic with you and use that in discussion with your staff members. It really may help you and your family. If you need more copies of it so your family can fill it out too, we can make copies. Thank you very much.